You didn't leave because you stopped loving them. You left because loving them started to feel like disappearing. Because every time you reached for them, something in them went still, cold, distant. Not always cruel. Sometimes it was softer than that. Sometimes it was a delayed text, a flat voice, a strange silence after intimacy, a look in their eyes that said, "I'm here, but I'm already halfway gone." And that kind of pain is its own kind of madness. Because how do you grieve someone who is still standing in front of you? How do you make peace with a person who says they care, but feels unreachable? How do you stop loving someone who made you feel chosen one day and too much the next? That confusion is what keeps people stuck. Not love, not loyalty, confusion. You keep replaying the tenderness, trying to understand how someone who held you so gently could pull away so completely. You keep searching for the exact moment it changed, the exact text you shouldn't have sent, the exact emotion you shouldn't have shown, the exact need that made them retreat into themselves like you had become a threat. But here is the truth most people do not want to say out loud. The more you chased clarity from an avoidant, the more unsafe they felt. And the more unsafe they felt, the less they could access the part of themselves that loved you openly. So what did you do? You tried harder. You explained more. You softened your tone. You gave them space, then worried in that space, then broke inside that space, then reached out again from the wound that space created. You thought persistence would prove love. But to someone with avoidant defenses, your pursuit did not always feel like love. It felt like pressure. Even if you were gentle, even if you were patient, even if all you wanted was a conversation. That is the brutal truth. Sometimes the very thing you did to save the connection is the thing that made them shut down harder. Not because you were wrong for needing, not because you were too emotional, not because you were unworthy, because they were wired to associate closeness with overwhelm. And if you do not understand that, you will spend months blaming yourself for a nervous system that was never yours to fix. Avoidant attachment is rarely about a lack of feeling. That is the lie the silence tells you, the lie the unread message tells you, the lie the distance tells you when it enters the room and suddenly makes you question your whole reality. But underneath that distance, something much more complicated is happening. When intimacy deepens, an avoidant person can experience it less like comfort and more like exposure. Their body begins to read emotional closeness as danger. Not conscious danger, not logical danger, but old danger, primitive danger, the kind stored below words. The amygdala fires before the mind can explain. The nervous system shifts into protection. Cortisol rises. The body prepares for threat. And suddenly the person who wanted love yesterday feels trapped by it today. This is why they can seem sincere and withdrawn at the same time. Why they can miss you and avoid you in the same breath. Why they can think about you constantly and still not reach out. Because the moment love asks for presence, their system starts negotiating escape. And that escape does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like needing time to think. Sometimes it looks like becoming really busy. Sometimes it looks like losing certainty the second things become real. Sometimes it looks like convincing themselves they have lost feelings, when really what they have lost is internal regulation. That matters. Because if you keep interpreting avoidant behavior through the lens of ordinary indifference, you will miss the emotional truth entirely. They didn't always stop caring. They felt overwhelmed by caring. That is what makes leaving an avoidant so psychologically violent. You are not just walking away from rejection, you are walking away from ambiguity, from mixed signals, from affection interrupted by absence, from connection poisoned by hesitation, from being deeply felt in private and painfully dismissed in practice. And part of you still wonders if leaving was a mistake. Because what if they were just scared? What if they really did love you? What if your leaving confirmed their deepest belief that closeness ends in abandonment? Listen carefully. You cannot heal someone by staying where you are being slowly erased. You cannot prove safety by betraying yourself. And you cannot love a person into emotional availability when every vulnerable moment activates their instinct to retreat. This is where so many people break themselves. They keep trying to be the exception, the one who finally gets through, the one who is patient enough, soft enough, loyal enough, self-sacrificing enough to melt a defense that was built long before they arrived. But the tragedy is this: the more you abandon your own center trying to reach them, the less they respect the emotional reality of your presence. Not because they are evil, because unconscious patterns do not reward what they do not have to risk losing. That is why one concept changes everything. Silence. Not punishment, not manipulation, not some childish game designed to make them jealous. Silence as nervous system withdrawal. Silence as dignity. Silence as the moment you stop knocking on a door that only opens when you are walking away from it. When you leave an avoidant and truly become silent, something disorienting happens. At first, they may feel relief. That part hurts to hear, but it is real. The pressure is gone. The emotional intensity drops. Their body unclenches. They tell themselves this is for the best. They focus on work, distractions, surface pleasures. They reclaim space. They breathe in the illusion of freedom and call it certainty. And if you panic during this stage, if you send the paragraph, the closure text, the final explanation, the one last thing I need you to understand, you interrupt the process. You restore the old dynamic. They withdraw, you pursue. They regulate through distance, you unravel through hope. The cycle survives. But if your silence is real, not strategic, not trembling with hidden invitations, not secretly waiting to be noticed every hour of every day, the emotional weather begins to change. Because now they cannot regulate through your pursuit. Now there is no message to react against, no emotion to defend against, no intensity to escape. Just absence. And absence is where the truth finally gets loud. The dopamine that once came from knowing you were there starts to crash. The emotional certainty they took for granted begins to disappear. The nervous system that once numbed itself through distance no longer has the same supply. And beneath the relief, another feeling rises. Loss. Quiet at first, then intrusive. They start remembering details they ignored when you were available. The softness in your voice, the way you noticed tiny changes in their mood, the message they never answered, the moment you looked hurt and said, "I can't keep doing this." The version of you they assumed would still be there after they figured themselves out. Now your absence becomes psychologically active, not because you are playing a game, because the attachment bond is no longer cushioned by your constant presence. This is when they begin to check your name, your last seen, your silence, the places where you used to be emotionally predictable. And it unsettles them. Because avoidant people often feel safest when they can control the distance, when they can come close, pull back, and still trust that the bond remains intact. But when you leave without collapsing, without begging, without turning your pain into a performance they can dismiss, you create something they cannot easily organize around. Consequences. And consequences force feeling to the surface. Now they have to sit with what your love was actually doing in their life. Now they have to feel the vacuum. This is where the power starts to shift, not because they are weak, because your energy is no longer feeding the pattern. You are no longer available for partial love, no longer translating silence into hidden devotion, no longer treating inconsistency like depth, no longer confusing your ability to endure pain with the existence of a soulmate bond. You become still. And stillness is terrifying to someone who relied on your movement. They may start reaching out in small ways, a random text, a breadcrumb, a memory, a soft check-in disguised as casualness, something light enough to protect their pride, but meaningful enough to test if the door is still open. This is the moment many people ruin their own transformation. Because the second that message arrives, the old chemistry wakes up. Hope floods the body, dopamine spikes, fantasy returns. Your nervous system, starved for relief, tries to call this love. But not every return is repair. Sometimes it is just their discomfort with losing access. Sometimes it is loneliness. Sometimes it is curiosity. Sometimes it is the panic of realizing that the person they could not choose might finally be choosing themselves. And if you mistake their reemergence for emotional maturity, you will walk straight back into the same wound, only deeper this time. Because now you will know exactly what it costs you. So you have to become honest in a way that burns. Do you miss them? Or do you miss the hope that this time they will become who you needed all along? Do you want them? Or do you want the ending where your suffering finally makes sense? Do you love them? Or are you addicted to the intermittent reinforcement of being almost chosen? These questions matter because avoidant dynamics are chemically powerful. The inconsistency itself creates obsession. The uncertainty activates craving. The rare moments of closeness flood the brain with relief, which can feel like proof of extraordinary connection, when it is often proof of an unstable reward loop. That is why leaving feels like withdrawal. Not just emotionally, biologically. Your body has been trained to survive on scraps and call it a feast. So when you leave, the ache is not evidence that you made the wrong choice. It is evidence that your system is detoxing from instability. Read that again in your bones. The ache does not always mean go back. Sometimes it means keep going. Because there is another truth hiding underneath all of this, and it may be the one that finally sets you free. The avoidant was not the only one afraid. They feared being engulfed. You feared being abandoned. They ran from closeness. You ran from emptiness. They shut down. You reached out. Different strategies, same wound. That is why this connection felt fated. It touched the oldest bruises in both of you. It made each of you feel alive in the exact language of your unresolved pain. And when something activates your childhood survival map, it can feel deeper than love, because it is older than love. But older does not mean truer, and painful does not mean sacred. If leaving them has made you feel like you are tearing off part of your own skin, it is because some part of you built your identity around being the one who stays, understands, waits, forgives, proves, absorbs, survives. The one who can handle almost love and call it devotion. But that identity has a price. It teaches people to meet you at your wound instead of your worth. It teaches your body to romanticize emotional starvation. It makes you proud of how much pain you can tolerate instead of how clearly you can leave what harms you. This is the pattern you have to break. Not just with them, inside yourself. Because if they come back before you have changed, you will call it destiny. And if they don't come back, you will call it proof that you were never enough. Both are lies. Your value was never hiding inside their capacity to stay, and their inability to hold intimacy was never a verdict on your lovability. You were not too much. You were standing in front of someone whose defenses made honest love feel like too much. There is a difference. A devastating one. And once you see it, you start to understand why leaving them is not about making them miss you. It is about refusing to miss yourself any longer. Yes, they may think about you. Yes, your absence may haunt them in the quiet moments. Yes, they may replay the connection with a kind of delayed grief, realizing too late that what overwhelmed them was also what nourished them. That happens. But your healing cannot depend on that. Because the moment your peace depends on their realization, you are still spiritually tied to their timing, still waiting for their awakening to validate your pain, still handing them the final authority over your story. No. The deepest power move is not becoming unforgettable to them. It is becoming unbetrayable to yourself. It is learning to sit through the urge to explain, to rescue, to check, to reopen, to translate crumbs into promises, to turn chemistry into compatibility, to turn longing into evidence. It is learning that self-worth is not loud. It does not scream. It does not beg to be chosen. It does not perform detachment while secretly bleeding for a response. Self-worth is quiet. It leaves the room when love becomes deprivation. It stops negotiating with inconsistency. It does not chase closure from people who only offer confusion. It understands that someone can care and still be incapable. And it knows that incapacity can still destroy you if you keep calling it potential. So if you left an avoidant, and now the silence feels unbearable, let it teach you. Let it show you where you once abandoned yourself for hope. Let it expose the part of you that believed love must be difficult to be real. Let it reveal how often you confused being emotionally activated with being deeply seen. And then do the sacred thing. Stay gone long enough to hear your own voice again. Not the voice that wonders what they're feeling, not the voice that fantasizes about their return, not the voice that writes speeches in the shower and reopens old photos like prayer. Your voice. The one beneath the obsession. The one beneath the grief. The one beneath the survival response. The one that knows you were never meant to beg for what should have been given freely. Because one day, if you do this right, the story changes. You stop asking why they pulled away. You stop analyzing the mixed signals. You stop trying to decode silence like it contains hidden love, and you start seeing the whole thing clearly. You were not hard to love. You were hard to avoid once your love became real. That overwhelmed them. That confronted them. That reached places in them they had spent years keeping numb. But none of that means you were meant to stay and bleed for their evolution. Some people meet your heart and do not know how to hold it. That is sad, but it is not your assignment. Your assignment is to become the kind of person who no longer mistakes emotional unavailability for depth, who no longer chases people whose love only appears when you are leaving, who no longer confuses being missed with being valued. Because being missed is not the same as being chosen. Being desired is not the same as being safe. Being unforgettable is not the same as being loved well. And you are here to be loved well. Even if right now that love begins with you. Especially then. So leave fully. Let them feel the shape of your absence if they have to. Let the silence say what your tears never could. Let the nervous system bond unravel. Let the fantasy starve. Let the old identity crack. And when the part of you that once would have waited by the door begins to die, do not panic. That is not the death of love. That is the death of self-abandonment. That is the moment you stop being the person who tries to earn tenderness from distance. That is the moment you become dangerous to every pattern that once fed on your doubt. Because now you know. You can love deeply and still leave. You can care and still close the door. You can grieve and still refuse to return. You can miss them and still choose yourself. That is power. Not coldness, not revenge, not making them crawl back broken. Power. The kind that does not need to be seen to exist. The kind that rebuilds your life from the inside out. The kind that teaches your body a new truth. Love is not supposed to feel like chasing someone through a locked house. So if you are standing in the wreckage of this connection, wondering whether they ever cared, whether they will come back, whether leaving was the right thing, breathe. Maybe they cared more than they could handle. Maybe losing you will wake something up in them. Maybe it won't. But the real miracle is no longer there. The real miracle is here. In the version of you that finally understands this. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to meet you in the right way. And now, you don't need to shrink. You don't need to chase. You don't need to decode. You don't need to prove that your heart is worth staying for. You know it is. And once you know it, everything changes. Because the person who leaves an avoidant and finds themselves in the process does not come back smaller. They come back whole. And whole people do not beg for love. They recognize it. They receive it. Or they walk away. Calmly. Completely. Forever, if necessary.